Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Radical Candor podcast. I'm Kim Scott.
I'm Jason Rosoff.
And I'm Amy Sandler. Today, we are answering a listener's question about a challenging situation that touches on several important aspects of radical candor. So we'll jump right in. This person writes, quote, "Hello, I'm a middle manager on a small team, and I have one report. My manager, who is the director of our department, had my role previously, so my report used to report to my manager. My manager asked me to put my report on a performance improvement plan, PIP. I met with the HR director individually and along with my manager, and we began the informal stage of the PIP in order to give my report the opportunity to meet the expectations for the role while documenting everything to provide to central HR for formal PIP approval. After 3 months of my report continuing to not meet role expectations, our HR director filed for the formal PIP, which we expect to eventually lead to my report's termination if they do not leave on their own accord before. I'm going to turn it over to Jason.
It's a long one. I'll pick it up from here. They continue. The PIP process that my company follows feels a bit like managing out to me, and I'm struggling to find the best way to lean into the radical candor values while complying with HR directives. At this stage, my manager, our HR director, and I agree that my report is not the right fit for the role, but I have to wait until the formal PIP conversation to express it. Every interaction I have with my report leading up to that conversation feels disingenuous. Also, following HR directives around resetting role expectations for my report and providing ongoing feedback and support in meeting those expectations led to high conflict between my report and me, resulting in loss of trust and unpleasant work environment. My report has reacted very poorly to my increased management and often challenges and pushes back, resulting in emotional fatigue and work inefficiency. I wonder if there's a better way to manage the informal stage of the PIP process, or if the PIP is doing exactly what it's intended to do, manage my report out. Sincerely frustrated.
Very sincerely frustrated. And we have recorded separate episodes on managing out on PIPs, the connection between performance development and management. We'll put all those in the show notes, but our listener is sincerely frustrated in quite a pickle. There's a lot going on here. And Kim, I'd love for you to just start whatever's leaping out at you first.
So the first thing I want to say is I'm sorry to this person for being in this situation. And I think that this person's manager really did not do the right thing. This person's manager should have managed this person out rather than passing them on and then say, manage this person out. That is lousy, especially if this is this person's first management experience. This is really... That's kind of obnoxious, frankly, to do to someone. I think.
Can I ask, so that's really interesting. Just tactically, are you saying that before this person's manager became the director, they should have started the PIP rather than sort of saying, congratulations, you're in this job, take it on?
Yeah, I would never promote someone to management, give them a direct report, and then say fire them, especially if I had been managing that person previously. This person is passing on a really hard job to a first-time manager, and that doesn't feel right to me.
Is it right for that person 2 layers above to manage the PIP? They should, even if they had hired this new person and said, because you're new here, I'm going to manage this process. Is that what you're recommending?
No, what I would say is if, let's say I have an employee, Bob, who I think should be managed out, and then I promote James over Bob. That's the wrong thing to do. I can promote James, but not give James Bob to manage out. I would manage Bob out myself. I would.
That's what I was saying. So even though they're another layer below you, you still would have owned it. Jason sounds like
I just wouldn't have given them a direct report that I knew should be fired in the first place.
Correct. Amy, the way you're asking the question assumes that all the direct reports had to automatically report to this person.
Gotcha.
But that's not usually the case, right? I can decide who the team is that this person is going to manage, that I'm promoting into management. I just didn't have to put this person on that team. And Kim, it's funny that you say that, because I have been the manager in this particular situation, and I did exactly what you described, which is I basically said, I'm going to continue to manage this person until either things turn around or I fire them, essentially.
Yeah. But anyway, that's not the situation. That's what should have happened. That's not what life is never ideal. So let's deal with the situation this person is in and answer their question. But I just want to give them a little bit of sympathy for being in a situation they shouldn't be in the first place.
Well, and I want to, and we'll get into what the situation they're in, but I wonder if there is a time for a radically candid conversation between our letter writer and their boss for having put them in this situation.
Well, let's talk about that later.
Okay.
It's a good question. I don't think I would lead with that, frankly. Given that the boss did that, the boss clearly thought it was fine. And there may be more to the story that I don't know. There may be a good reason for the boss having done that. So go ahead,
Jason.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it seems like the central theme of the question is, am I being manipulative by following through with this process? That's the core tenet of the question. There's something else, which is the results of going through the informal PIP were not great. So like that was at the end, they basically said like this person got really upset when we started to, it sounds like, really sort of focus in on their performance and give them a lot of feedback about how they were not meeting expectations. Like, unsurprisingly, that led to a tense relationship between this new manager and their new direct report.
Yes. Yeah. And so this person is not doing the fact that the situation is tense is unsurprising.
Correct.
In fact, it's inevitable that the situation is tense. It doesn't mean that the person who wrote to us is doing anything wrong. And what I would say, sort of to answer the core question, which is this a disingenuous thing? I would answer no. I think what this person needs to do is to be crystal clear about what's wrong and where the PIP is headed, so that this person can decide, do I want to resign or do I want to be fired? I mean, that's basically the choice that the employee has at this point, because they didn't meet the PIP. The only thing that would be disingenuous is if this person's direct report does begin to meet the terms of the PIP and they fire them anyway. Like, that's not fair. That's managing out in a way that's unfair. But if you tell a person what the expectations are, the person doesn't meet the expectations, and then you formalize it with a more formal PIP, and they're still not meeting expectations, the job is just to tell them that in every single one-on-one, which is going to be unpleasant. It's going to be unpleasant for the employee. It's going to be unpleasant for the manager. There's nothing pleasant about this, but this is where kind is clear.
And just to be really clear, and obviously we're not exactly in this situation, but Kim, what's leaping out for me is the writer shared the stage that they're in. Quote, my manager, our HR director, and I agree that my report is not right for the role, but I have to wait until the formal PIP conversation to express it. And they're saying it feels disingenuous because every interaction they have leading up to that conversation feels disingenuous.
Yes.
So it's not clear they can be clear.
No, I think they can be clear. They can say in every single meeting, you're not meeting expectations. That's just no fun. You're not meeting the PIP. I think that's basically the conversation that they have to have over and over again. I think if I read between the lines, is what this person is saying is, can't we just fire them already? It doesn't seem very nice to go through the performance improvement plan. But the law in many, many instances demands that you formalize, that you give a person an opportunity to fix the problem. And even if the law doesn't demand it, I think fairness demands it. Because if you don't have a formal performance improvement plan, what happens is that some managers think they've been clear, but they haven't been clear. And then the employee is surprised when they get fired. So the idea of a performance improvement plan is to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, to provide a formal check on the potential lack of clarity that an employee has about how they're doing as compared to what's expected of them. I think there's another thing here, which is that the sometimes rigidly following a process that is intended to like follow the law can actually create a situation that is open to legal scrutiny. So like I have seen things go wrong in PIPs that are too rigidly followed, where the person starts to feel bullied or harassed because they feel like they're constantly being told that they're doing something wrong, and there's all this. And so I just want to empathize for a moment. There's an intuition that this manager has, which is like, if we really had a brass tacks conversation with this person and said, we don't think this is going well. To your point, Kim, not that you can't possibly improve, but we don't think this is going well. They've already imagined that they're going to pay this person for the rest of the PIP process. Like, what if they could just offer them to say,
yeah,
another alternative here is for us, we'll pay you through the end of the PIP, but we'll reduce your responsibilities to essentially like turning over the keys to somebody else to give you time to look for another job. If you want to continue to try to meet the expectations, we will work earnestly with you in order to do that.
And most PIPs give the person that option. You could quit now and you'll be paid out throughout the period of the PIP, or you could keep trying and then you'll get 2 weeks severance or something like that.
Correct. But it doesn't sound like that's on the table. It seems like this person would have, given the amount of detail that they gave, it seems like they would have mentioned it. And I just wanted to call that out because I do think that if that's not an option, then I better understand why it feels a bit like Damocles' sword is hanging over over their collective heads, and why it feels like there's no way to have sort of a real conversation about it. I guess I'll say, like, I 100% agree with you, Kim, that like this is going to be tense. There's no way for this to be like good vibes for everybody involved in this situation. And that stinks, like that the manager is in this position. And I actually think that discomfort it is appropriate in a situation like this, because like some set of failures has led to a situation where like a person is very likely to lose their job. I don't think that should feel easy breezy for everybody.
Yeah, no, it shouldn't.
It involved. So I think but accepting that this is going to be tense, and maybe even giving voice to that, to say, because it sounds like they have quite a short relationship, to say, I know we haven't been working together very long, and I know this is a difficult situation, and my goal is not to paper over the difficult work and emotions that we're going to experience going through this, and just know that I'm here, like I'm open to understanding when you're frustrated or upset by the process. That might provide some relief.
Yeah,
it might not.
So, yeah, no, I think it probably will. I mean, sometimes caring personally is about acknowledging the negative emotions that are in the room and not pretending that they're otherwise. I think that another thing this person could do to sort of move up on the care personally dimension in this very difficult situation is to try to imagine a job that this person would be very good at. Like, this person their employee is probably not terrible at everything. They're not a bad person. They're not a bad employee. They're just bad at this particular job. And so thinking about what kind of job would this person excel at, and noticing the traits that are really helpful to that you really admire in the person. Say, look, you're really good at X, but that's not what is required in this role. There's another job where where this talent that you have would be really welcome. Like, for example, I had an employee who was really detail oriented and very into process, but we were at a startup and nobody wanted any process. We didn't need any process. And as I was in the process of telling him a quick process, a non-process process of explaining to him why this wasn't working out, I acknowledged, like, you have some really wonderful skills. And the problem is that we don't need those skills right now. Those skills are actually hurting you right now. But there are plenty of places where they would be a tremendous asset. But here they're a liability.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful frame. I mean, just going back to the emotion, acknowledging that's extra sort of emotional effort for our letter writer, but it might have some real value in resetting the relationship. I wanted to also acknowledge, I want to get as clear as we can on this idea of kind of informal PIP conversation and formal PIP conversation, because it felt to me that part of the feeling of disingenuous was a matter of where they were in the stage, and they had to actually follow this process of informal versus informal. And Jason, I'm curious if you can just share for our listeners, like, as frustrating as that might be for our letter writer, what is the value of that? Like, why is that actually a beneficial thing kind of at a high level?
Well, without understanding exactly what the process looks like, I'm going to make a couple of guesses here. But one benefit of the informal PIP process is one, let's imagine this was there was no manager switch. This is just like the person had been reporting this person for a long time. The informal PIP process requires consent from other people to say, we have evaluated your evaluation of this person. We actually agree that they are not meeting expectations. So like the person doesn't just go start winging it and say like, like Kim and I don't get along, so I'm going to put Kim on an informal PIP process. So that's one advantage of the informal PIP process, is it requires you to like reach out to people and say, I need to get some explicit feedback from you about my assessment of this person. The second thing that it does is it makes you accountable to your boss and your HR manager to give this person very clear feedback about where they're not meeting expectations. And for you to document that, at least to some degree, so that your effort can be evaluated, your effort to communicate the problem can be evaluated. And to do all of that without creating explicit consequences, without saying like at the end of this, something is going to happen to this person's job, like that informal process, I think it'd be really important. Because it's the reason why PIPs feel so bad is like most people perform worse under scrutiny when they know they're being evaluated, that they start to, I mean, I experience this all the time. You know, I can probably type 110 words a minute when I'm not typing in a Zoom meeting. So you put my screen up and I start typing in a Zoom meeting, and it's like I'm back to Mavis Beacon, like seventh grade. That was a
I don't know that reference, but I'm going along with it. Yeah.
There's a program to teach people to type called Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing. I was like, I remember in like, is it like
Amelia
grade.
Bedelia drawing the curtains, or is it a different?
It's a real thing? Slightly different, but same kind of vein. Okay. But like that, so like I actually think there's a bunch of value in that informal PIP process, both to make sure that the manager is doing their job and to hold them accountable to doing their job, and to create an opportunity for a person to respond to performance issues without the threat of some sort of consequence hanging over their head. So I don't think the hard part is when you get to the end of that process and you're like, this has not gone well. We've seen no improvement. It's hard to hold out hope that formalizing it and saying, hey, we're putting you on notice, like this is now an official thing, HR is involved. We either need to see some performance improvement or you're going to be terminated essentially at the end of this process. And as Kim said, in some places, the law literally requires that people have that clear of an opportunity to address their performance. But it feels really bad to have gone through the first part. And all I can say, the only thing I can offer that might help a little bit is the acknowledgement that for the person on the receiving end of the informal process, there is some benefit to not having that consequence at the end. It actually slightly increases the likelihood that they would be able to respond positively to the feedback.
I think that as a manager, one of the reasons why everybody hates PIPs. Let's just put that on the table. And I think a PIP is I think it's a good process. And the reason is that
is high praise from someone who's not such a fan of
a process.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm not a fan of process. And at a startup, I wouldn't do a PIP, but at a big company, I would put PIPs in place. And the reason is that, as we have said many times on this podcast, the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has happened. And so often what will happen is a manager will be saying something, giving some feedback to a direct report, and the direct report won't have heard it. And usually the manager then has decided, okay, I need to fire this person. And what these two, the informal and the formal processes do, is they put some checks and balances on this situation, which is always good. If you have power, it's good to have checks and balances on your power. And so the informal one is a way of making sure that other people agree with your assessment, and it should help you be more clear. However, no matter how clear you are, there are still going to be some people who won't have heard it. And that's why not only do you say it, you start writing it down and documenting so that it is indubitably clear to this direct report. And sometimes that feels like a legal CYA thing, but And sometimes it is. I want to acknowledge that. But I think there are good reasons for this.
Kind of building on that, Kim, I wonder if you have specific tips on what our listener could actually say. The point where they say, my report has reacted very poorly to my increased management and often challenges and pushes back, like phrases that they could say to kind of demonstrate why they're saying what they're saying. Like, obviously it's an uncomfortable thing, but what did you find worked as well as it could have in a difficult situation of trying to build that rapport with the person?
One time when I was firing someone, and because there was a pattern of problems, and this had all been documented, and this person was extremely defensive. And so every time I would give an example, I couldn't even get to the second example because they would go so far down the rabbit hole on why that wasn't really a problem. And finally, I said, time out. I want you to notice the same pattern that I am noticing. I'm going to give you 5 examples of this problem, and I do not want to be interrupted until I get to the 5th. I promise you at the end, I will give you an opportunity to spend as much time on each one as you want, but I want you to notice the same pattern I'm noticing. And by the time I got to the 5th, this person understood that it was time to go and quit arguing. So sometimes and this is part of the value of writing it all down in the performance improvement plan too. But just saying to the person, look, I promise I'm going to listen, but I want you to understand the same thing I'm understanding. And making it clear, I think, also to this person that they cannot argue their way out of this situation. That they could perform their way out of this situation, but they cannot argue their way out of this situation.
Jason, any ads?
I think that that's so helpful. Like I'm feeling a lot of empathy for the person in this situation, especially if they're relatively new to management. Like all the things that Kim and I have been describing, these are the things that we did after we made all the mistakes. There's just, I feel this like well up of emotion for this person because it's so hard. Like, and you do feel caught between as a manager, especially if you haven't been through this process before, you've never seen it done particularly well. You do sort of feel like you're following orders without necessarily fully understanding why you're being asked to do it. So that's why I'm hopeful that the explanation of like why this is useful might be helpful to this person, is to say, understand like why what you're being asked to do might actually be helpful. But like some of it is really subtle in like how you approach these individual conversations with this person. You haven't had a long time to develop a great relationship or even any relationship with this person before you're sort of thrown into this. And I think it could feel like you're walking around in a minefield, essentially. Like that's, I'm guessing, what his day-to-day feels like anytime there's an interaction, or their day-to-day looks like anytime there's an interaction with this person on their calendar, right? Which is like, I better get my dancing shoes on because I'm going to be tiptoeing through the tulips here.
Yeah, I think here's some maybe helpful hints, or maybe not helpful. You all can tell me if you think they're helpful or not, for going into the one-on-ones with this direct report. Because you got to wake up on the days when you have a one-on-one with a pit in your stomach.
I have a pit for the PIP already. Yes.
Yeah. So I think one thing that has helped me in this situation is, for me, before I go in, to think of 2 things. First of all, to think of a job that I sucked at. Like, I know I don't suck, but I did suck at that job. And then, because I think that one of the mistakes that one can make in this situation is to decide you feel bad. At least here's what has happened to me mentally. I feel terrible that I have to fire this person. And in order to sort of overcome these feelings of guilt and these awful feelings that I have, I decide that I have to fire this person because they're a worthless human being. And that is not the case. That is not why you are firing this person. So I think managing your own feelings of guilt and discomfort with the situation and reminding yourself, this person is going to be great at some job. This person is a wonderful human being, as all human beings are, but this is not the right job for this person. And part of your job as a manager is to be crystal clear with people when they're in the wrong job so that they can go find the right job. It's not an act of kindness to allow a person to continue to do a job that they're not good at. So remind yourself that it's not mean and that kind is clear as you go in. So that's number one. Number two, and this was suggested to me by a leader who I really admire. He said when he has to fire someone, before he goes in to have the conversation, or when he's in the process of conducting a PIP, before he walks into the room, he imagines the face of someone he loves. And that puts him in this different kind of mindset when he goes into the room to remind himself, this is a person. This is a human being who I need to treat this human being with respect, even though this is a really hard situation.
I think those are great tips. This might be a little devil's advocate, Kim, but on the first one around, especially thinking about things this person could be good at or other roles, I'm just aware, even from my own experience, that on the disingenuous side, if this person can't explicitly say, because they're still in the informal period, they can't say you're out of a job. What they can say is, you're not meeting expectations. You're not meeting expectations. I wonder if it may land disingenuous, or what aren't you telling me, if you're saying, but Amy, what would you really like to be doing instead? Or what's something else? Like, how can that inquiry be from a place of actually trying to be helpful rather than it coming from, well, because I can't tell you you're going to be fired, I'm now asking you this other line of inquiry.
Say, ask the person what else they think about, skills that they have, and point out those skills. Like, you can still give praise. You can say, I noticed in that meeting that you told a really funny joke, and you're funny, and I love that about you. Unfortunately, it doesn't always, humor was not the right thing in that kind of meeting, or something like that. Like, let the person know. You don't want to give person praise thinking, I do more of that and I'll keep this job. But you can still point out to the person that they have these other skills that you do notice and that you do appreciate and that are worthwhile. They're just not relevant to this job.
Really helpful.
Yeah. I think this person could be exactly right about everything that they've said, or there's the potential that there's some misunderstanding. So one of the things that I'm leaving with, like meta, but not just in one-on-ones, I think an interesting question to go back to the HR person and their boss with is, what am I being restricted from saying in these conversations, and what am I allowed to say? Because here's what I'd like to say. I would like to say the following things to this person, because I think it's actually going to help us resolve this situation faster and with less animosity.
Yes.
Because that's what they want, right? They want to resolve the situation as smoothly as possible. And so by offering them a pathway, so I think that might be a worthwhile conversation, is just to lay on the table, like, the thing that's in their head, because maybe they think they're being prohibited from saying it, but they might be wrong. Like, maybe they go to their manager and the HR person, they say, no, actually, it's okay for you to say that. We're not saying don't say that.
Yeah.
But at least then they would know.
Yeah. Another thing this person could do is they could ask either their manager or HR to go into these meetings with them. Sometimes it's useful to have two people and to give them feedback. I'll say there was one time when I had someone who was working for me who was a first-time manager, and they had to fire someone on their team. And I didn't go to the meeting with them because I thought, I don't want to undermine them. I don't want to micromanage. And this person just made a hash of it. And I felt so bad later. I was like, I did not set this person up for success. I should have gone to the meeting with them. And if things started going sideways, I could grab the steering wheel, So I think that when it comes time to have the final conversation, if the person who wrote in has never fired anyone, it's perfectly reasonable to ask your boss or HR to go in and to that conversation with you and to give you feedback afterwards about how it went. And also I'm teaching my children to drive right now. So to grab this, and occasionally one has to grab the steering wheel. And it's good, I wouldn't let them drive alone, nor would it be legal to. But I think for the same reason, it might be good to have someone else in the room with them when they have to have the last conversation. Jason, you were going to say something.
I feel like we've shared lots of ideas for ways that this person could think about this, potential things that they could try. I wonder if we want to wrap up with a couple of tips.
I think tips sound great. And then after the tips, I'd love to get one final recommendation for what and when the letter writer can say to their boss about having been put in this position at the top. So I'm giving you a little time to noodle on that as we head into our Radical Candor checklist, which are tips so that you can start putting Radical Candor into practice.
Tip number 1, while PIPs can feel like they're just leading to termination, they can also offer a real opportunity for growth if approached with Radical Candor. As you move into the sort of more formal stage of the process, keep the compassionate and clear communication going. Make sure your report knows that the PIP's goal is not just about meeting current role expectations, but also about them finding a place where they can really shine if you're allowed to. And even if that means eventually transitioning out of the team, I think finding a way to communicate that might be the end of this role, but not a judgment about them as a person is really important. If you stay open and sincere, you can help your report see the bigger picture and make better choices for their career.
Tip number 2, if you feel like the PIP is being used primarily to manage someone out rather than allowing them an opportunity to improve, it may be worth discussing with your HR representative and your manager if there are alternative roles or paths for your report that align better with their strengths, and using some of these conversations as an opportunity to highlight your direct report's strengths. If you're not clear on what you can and can't say, you certainly can, check in with your HR team member as well as your manager.
Tip number 3. Don't lead the person on. Acknowledge the gap in performance and acknowledge the fact that it may not be fixable. Help them to take ownership of their next steps. Try framing it in the following kind of ways. I want to be honest with you. We've been working on these performance expectations for a while, and I know this process has been frustrating for us both. At this point, it's clear that the role isn't aligning with your strengths, and I want to support you in figuring out what's next. If your HR person says, don't say that, I want to be clear that this is not headed in the right direction, you could also say. You could also ask this person, what kind of work makes you feel energized? Or you could point out when you notice that they've been doing work that makes them feel energized, point it out and say, you were really good at this. Unfortunately, that's not the job, but you are good at this thing. You could ask the person, where do you think your skills are best applied? You can ask the person, how can I help you explore other opportunities that might be a better fit? Although, again, ask HR before you ask that question.
All right. And before we close, Jason or Kim, any tips on what should our letter writer say to their manager?
So don't say, Kim Scott said you're a terrible manager. That's that's my first bit of advice. Because again, I do have compassion for this manager. I've made this mistake before. I think what I would do is say, why did you decide to have me manage this PIP instead of managing it and instead of firing the person before I became a manager? You could say, if you felt this way, I felt like I was little bit thrown into the deep end of management in my very first management role.
Yeah, I think that the point of trying to understand why the situation is the way it is really valuable. And I think it seems to me that it would be pretty useful at some point to do some kind of postmortem on this whole process and say, what have we learned from this process that we can take forward to avoid making mistakes or to repeat some of the things that worked well.
Well, thank you both. And for more tips, check out our YouTube channel where you can not only listen to this podcast, but also watch dozens of other Radical Candor videos. You can get this podcast early and ad-free when you join our community at radicalcandor.com/community. And the show notes for this episode are at radicalcandor.com/podcast. As we like to say, praise in public, criticize in private. So if you like what you hear, we hope you do, please do follow, rate, and review us wherever you listen to your podcasts. It really does help. And we also appreciate getting your criticism. Please email that to podcast@radicalcandor.com, as well as challenges and questions. Thank you again for our listener writing in, and we are with you and hoping for the best possible outcome. Bye for now.
Take care, everybody.